Good morning. I'm Dori, Sajdak, your service leader. Jeremy Johnson is on AV, and we're so privileged that Dr. Henry Louis Taylor Jr. is here today. I've had the distinct pleasure to hear him speak several times this year, and we're honored to have you here at UUEA. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Taylor. And welcome all members, friends, and visitors to UU of East Aurora. We are a community in which all people are welcomed, regardless of belief systems, ethnicities, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, or economic standing. We are in a safe space. When I first heard about this church a couple years ago, I went to the website and I read about the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. Number 1 is, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And when I read that, I had this Jerry Maguire moment. I don't know if you remember the movie, but towards the end, he comes to her door and he gives her this impassioned speech, very romantic. And when he finishes, she says, "You had me at hello." And I felt like that was my hello moment. So hello to all of you. How great it is that we're here again together today. Please take a moment to stand in body and spirit and say a quick hello to someone else. To our participants on Zoom, hello friends. We know you're there, and if you want to take a minute to say hello or enter into the chat. Before we begin today, I believe our membership coordinator, Tara, has some announcements.
Okay, I have them. You didn't print it out, right? I have it. Imperfect. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tara Straight. I'm the membership coordinator once again. Just a quick reminder that the building will be closed the next 2 Sundays before we officially reopen for the fall on September 11th, which is super exciting. The East Aurora Community Drop-In Meditation Group still meets on Tuesdays from 7 to 9, so please feel free to go. Deep breathing, everyone. On September 11th, as previously mentioned, we begin the church year, which is super exciting. Yay! Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Yikes. Okay. Reverend Buddy Hubbard is coming to preach and play music here for the very first time, and he's in retirement, so he can really let it loose, which is fantastic. We love that. So UUs call homecoming our water ceremony. I didn't really know what it was, so I accidentally said things that didn't make sense, and now I understand what it is because Google and the internet is helpful. Everyone brings a little water from their summers, and we'll have a potluck picnic and a barbecue so we can really dig in. But you're bringing your water and something to share, and we will all join together before our church year starts, which is super exciting. But I do want to remind everyone that we do have vegans in the house. So we have carnivores. However, if you want to get creative and go on Pinterest and find a vegan version of whatever recipe you've been making for a million jillion years, please do that. That would be fantastic. And for me, my class that has been moved several times, I'm going to be doing it now with Rebecca Whiteman, which I'm really excited about, on September 18th. So if you have not come to talk to me about it, or you have not a single clue what I'm speaking of, there is a table that I set up, a welcoming table at the front when you first walk in, that has a flyer that describes what we're going to be doing. It'll occur after service on the 18th. Essentially, the class is just talking about how can we improve our interactions with one another, regardless of who we are, how old we are, what we look like, what our experiences are, so that everyone feels comfortable enough to be vulnerable and part of this community, which is such a beautiful thing, and it's super important. So if you'd like to come and do that, that would be fantastic. And my last announcement is that we're looking for 2 volunteers to bring treats for coffee hour, one on the 18th and then one on the 25th. So enjoy. Thank you.
It's always hard to follow up Tara. Her energy is amazing. Anyone else with announcements? Okay. I begin this service by acknowledging that our nation was largely built on the ancestral land of Native nations and by the labor of enslaved peoples. May we persevere to achieve a clear understanding of our shared past and utilize these lessons learned for good and for progress. Today's prelude is Draw the Circle Wide.
Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we stand side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle
This will probably be the hardest part of this whole entire morning. Let's see if I can actually get this chalice lit. Please join me in saying the chalice lighting words printed on the order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in the celebration of the life we share together. Our opening words today are by Reverend Hilary Kripchenia. We are like aspen trees who have mistakenly thought that since we look like many trees, that is the truth. But under the ground, our root system is one. We are fully alive when we are connected because we were always part of one another. We are reminded that UUEA cannot do anything without members and friends showing up and supporting each other. Sincere thanks to those who participate in events, volunteer their time, share their talents, and who are able to be generous. If you are inclined to give after the service, there is a plate on the bookshelf in the back, or you may do so online at uuea.org. Spirit of Life by Leah Morris.
Spirit for stories of compassion flow with the wind, rise in the seas, move in my hand, giving life a shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of light, come to me, come to me.
We do have story time today for the young and young at heart. If anyone is interested in joining me up front. If not, that's okay. We're going to put it up on the screen too so you can see it. The book today is called Strictly No Elephants by Lisa Manchev. Go back one, Jeremy. Yeah, thanks. The trouble with having a tiny elephant for a pet is that you never quite fit in. No one else has an elephant. Every day I take my elephant for a walk. His is a very thoughtful sort of walk. He doesn't like the cracks in the sidewalk much. I always go back and help him over. That's what friends do, lift each other over the cracks. Today, I'm walking my tiny elephant to number 17. It's Pet Club Day and everyone will be there. Come along, that's a good boy. I coax him the last few feet. It'll be fine. When I look up, there's a sign on the door. Strictly no elephants. My tiny elephant leads me back to the sidewalk, never minding the cracks. That's what friends do. Brave the scary things for you. Did you try to go to the pet club meeting too? The girl asks. Yes, I say, but they don't allow elephants. The sign didn't mention skunks, the girl says, but they don't want us to play with them either. They don't know any better, I tell her. He doesn't stink, the girl adds. No, he doesn't, I agree. What if we start our own club? Come along, I say, making certain that my tiny elephant follows me, because that's what friends do, never leave anyone behind. We can play here, one of our new friends says, all of us. So we paint our own sign, all are welcome. My tiny elephant will give you directions if you need them, because that's what friends do. Thank you, Jeremy. Today our program is on origins of segregation in Buffalo. Dr. Henry Louis Taylor Jr. is an internationally recognized scholar for his work on distressed urban neighborhoods and social isolation among people of color. He is a professor of urban and regional planning and founding director of the Center for Urban Studies at the University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning. He also serves as the Associate Director of the University of Buffalo Community Health Equity Research Institute. Dr. Taylor's research centers around concerns with the redevelopment of shrinking cities and metropolitan cities, with a focus on social, economic, and racial justice. Dr. Taylor is co-author on the Center for Urban Studies 2021 report, The Harder We Run, which aims to answer the question, has Black Buffalo progressed since 1990? The report tells us what happened to Black Buffalo over the past 31 years since the last study was conducted, why it happened, and what we can do about it. His public service over the years has involved serving on national, state, and local governing boards and planning committees, and includes the creation of the cyberhood.net, whose mission is to encourage critical thinking about the plight of communities of color, conditions in the inner city, and the problems of low-wage workers. The website's goal is to connect students, scholars, practitioners, and activists from across the racial and class divide in order to build meaningful relationships. Most recently, you may have heard him on WBFO's new show, Buffalo, What's Next, which focuses on the reasons for the May 14th top shooting and where we go as a community from here. Welcome, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you for that very warm introduction. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you this morning. I was blessed with a lovely summer drive from Buffalo out here after anticipating some thunderstorms. So things are looking really well. This morning I want to talk about the issue of the origins of racial residential segregation in Buffalo and Erie County. Normally when we think about racial residential segregation, we focus on individuals and the choices that individuals make in terms of where they want to live, the choices they make in terms of whether they want to buy or rent, the choices that they make in relationship to who they would like to see as their neighbors, the choices that they make in regards to the kind of amenity and social life they want to have in the communities where they choose to live. In this framework, everything is about individual choice and individual decisions. I want us to step outside that framework today and look at the systems and structures that frame and deeply influence individual choice and that shape the relationships that exist betwixt and between the races. Most folks know that Buffalo Erie County is considered one of the most segregated cities in all of the United States. I think among the last rankings, it was something like number 6, based on a study done by the Brookings Institute. But it was not always that way. Back in the industrial age, when industry was the engine that drove the economic development of this city and this region, African Americans shared residential space with white immigrant workers. Back at this moment in time, work, not race, was the primary determinant of where people lived in the city. A lot of that had to do with the nature of the transportation system and the like. But nevertheless, where you worked was the engine that drove where you lived within the context of the city. So if we look here, we see that in industrial Buffalo, there were these major industrial zones in downtown Buffalo, in the Black Rock area of the city. And across the face of Buffalo's east side were numerous factories, and workers clustered around those factories. The east side was the breadbasket of Buffalo, New York. And in that moment, African Americans shared residential space with the white immigrant workers. Lived side by side with the Irish, the Polish, the Germans, and particularly the Russian, primarily Jewish community. And in that instance, they lived together in an environment that was still shaped by income and class. So although race was not the dominant engine that drove the residential development of neighborhoods and communities, it operated within the larger context of class. And these immigrant workers and blacks huddled together on the cheapest, most undesirable residential lands within the context of the city. And so they lived often on the same streets. The purple is the black community, and you can see the extent to which they're interconnected and integrated. They had encounters. They developed friendships. The historian Lillian Williams tells us that there were a number of blacks who learned German so they could hang out and party with their German neighbors and friends. We know that the Italians and the blacks developed good relationships. We see that in their offsprings. In Buffalo today, people who trace their ancestry back to black-Italian relations back at this moment. But not only did they live on the same streets, but often they lived together in the same boarding houses. As in this case, where African Americans lived in a boarding house on Jefferson Avenue with a group of Russians and a couple of Canadians. So I don't want to suggest that this was an age of kumbaya and everybody down there hugging and kissing. It was a lot more complicated than that. Hostilities existed, and all of those other elements were there and were a part of the environment. But the thing that I want to stress and the thing that I want to emphasize is that racism had not yet been incorporated in the living space, and that people did not make a distinction between who you were and the conditionality that was found inside of your neighborhood. That in this moment of time, even among the white population, they were still divided along national lines. And we were still thinking about, are you Russian? Are you Italian? Are you German? Are you Polish? Are you Irish? And if you're Irish, what part of Ireland did you come from? And you know you're not as good as the British and the English. That was the way that place was. The critical element was at that moment of time, racism was not yet incorporated in the urban environment. And people did not look at other groups and wonder, why are you here? class was the driving element. And the upper classes, they didn't want anybody beneath them living in and around them unless they were working for them. So what happened? What changed all of that? The engine that changes that destroys that age of shared residential space was the rise of home ownership, mass home ownership. Before the Depression, home owning was a risky business. In order to buy a house, you had to put 50% down, pay off the loan in 2 or 3 years. In some instances, you could get it renewed. But in many instances, that was no guarantee. So, for people who wanted to have their own homes, it wasn't a commodity. It wasn't a commodity. It was a cultural artifact. People would build their own houses. And a lot of times they would build up 2 or 3 rooms, family grow. They'd build another room on the back, family grow. They'd build another room on the back. You see those houses that the immigrants built in Buffalo? I said, some of those houses are so long. I've been told, I don't know. But they're so long that it's 8 o'clock in the living room and 10:30 in the kitchen. Now, that's a long house. My point is that it wasn't a commodity. But in the Depression era, they said, how can we get out of this depression? And some thinkers decided that the best way to get out of this depression was to create mass home ownership. And not just to create mass home ownership, but to turn the owner-occupied house into a tool of wealth production. It would no longer be a cultural artifact where people just expected to move in and live until they died. But it was a commodity to be bought and later sold for profit. That was fundamental. Now, in order to do that, they had to figure out how to change the money mortgage system. And in order to do that, they had to determine, how do we decide how valuable a house is? Think about it. Suppose somebody came up to you and said, we're now moving to a new system. We have to decide, how much is your life worth? Now, that's a complicated question. I hope nobody asked me that. So they had to set up a system, and they wanted to know, how do we decide how much the house is valued today? But if we're talking about a 20 or 30-year mortgage, we got to know how valuable your house will be in the future. How much is it worth today? And how much will it be worth 30 years from now? And as a banker, as a financer, before I start to make my investments, I have to have an answer to that question. And that task fell to Frederick M. Babcock, a real estate appraiser. And back then, the appraisal industry was in a very premature state, not highly developed at all. So Babcock developed a theory of neighborhood change. I mean, he used his own notions about it. But according to Babcock, a neighborhood grew. It was born, it grew, it matured, then it declined and eventually deteriorated into a slum. And a slum was similar to the death of a neighborhood. Then Babcock drawing on the racial attitudes of the day, came to the remarkable conclusion that the presence of blacks in a neighborhood signaled the rapid decay and decline of that community. He also indicated that the presence of immigrants in a community also triggered decline, but not as severe, not as devastating, not as catastrophic as black presence in the neighborhood and the community. So in the formulation of his system of housing value, Babcock added the element of race and class. So in this system, the formula was simple. As a community increased in terms of its white population and increased in terms of class exclusivity, value went up. As it increased in terms of blackness and class inclusivity, value went down. So in Babcock's formulation, he connected increases in white valued houses to decreases in black value units. They were linked and tied together just like up and down. You cannot have up without down. And in this system, you could not have increased home value without white exclusivity and class exclusivity, measured against blackness and inclusion. So they took it a step farther and connected neighborhood development around housing value. So in areas where housing values were high, development was intensified to create places that were wholesome and that promoted social well-being in terms of amenity, the quality of institutions, shops and stores, and accessibility to education and opportunities. In places where values went down, they triggered underdevelopment and predatory activities designed to extract wealth from those areas and to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental impact. So, in order to make all of that happen, they created new institutions, the Homeowners Loan Corporation to fine-tune, finalize, and develop the amortized mortgage, the Federal Housing Administration to pour millions and millions of dollars and place them in the hands of homeowners. And that was the structural shifts and changes that would occur betwixt and between the industrial city and the knowledge city that would emerge after World War II. Now let's take a look to see how this unfolded in Erie County. In Erie County, to test the Babcock theory, the federal government embarked on a series of studies in some 240 cities across the country called the HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation Security Maps. A lot of people consider those the birth and the origins of redlining. But in reality, what was more important than the concept of redlining were the values that Babcock instituted and developed. Now, if you look at the color-coded map, you see the areas of yellow are those areas that are deteriorating and declining, and the reds are those that have already declined. So, looking at the map, you see that much of the east side, as early as 1937, is deteriorating. It's deteriorating. Along with the areas in and around downtown where the industrial zones were concentrated. Now, all of this is important because Babcock's maps were developed before large numbers of African Americans migrated into the city. So, after World War II, all of this is in place. And in Erie County, it unfolds in the same way that it does in much other parts of the country. First, the home ownership zone was not in the city, but in the suburban regions. That was the home ownership zone. And so between 1940 and 1970 and 1980, thousands of white workers and whites moved from Buffalo to the home ownership zones. Now, meantime, thousands of blacks were moving into the city, leaving the South and moving into various cities, North, Midwest, and the Far West. They called it the Second Great Migration. And all of this movement triggered a massive reconstruction of Erie County. Now, I want to stress, as whites were rushing out of the city, they were not fleeing blacks, but they were rushing to the home ownership zones, while blacks were confined to the central city. In the suburban zones, the white community used zoning laws, restrictive covenants, and outright intimidation to confine the growing black population to the central city and to keep them out of the suburban regions. And again, Babcock's theory is being operationalized, that you increase value by increasing whiteness and by increasing class and exclusivity. And so the efforts to confine blacks to the core and on the eastern side of the core was part of that process. So we can see here that by 1970, for the first time, you have more whites or more people living in Erie County suburbs than you do in the city of Buffalo. In the same period from about 1940 to 1970, the African American population jumps from about 18,000 to 94,000. And now we see Babcock's theory fully operationalized. If you look at the yellow areas at the top, those are the highest valued suburbs in all of Erie County, followed by the green, which are the second highest valued suburbs. One of the most interesting things is that you look at that. If you look at the top valued places, you find almost no black folks up in there. almost none in the second most value. But if you drop all the way down to the blue, that's where you see a situation where the African American population is concentrated in those sections of Erie County municipalities that have the two things: the highest concentration of blacks and the highest concentration of working class whites and other groups, all concentrated within that context of that area. Then within the central core itself, which is highly segregated, blacks are concentrated on the cheapest, most undesirable lands within the city of Buffalo, but also within the framework of all of Erie County. So when I talk about undesirability, here you take a look at maps that show the most desirable and the least desirable communities. When we look at the least desirable communities and we go back, we also see that those were the industrial areas. So understand that when thousands of whites moved out of those areas during the industrial age, as we were shifting to the knowledge city, they created the problem of housing abandonment. And successive waves of mayors tore down thousands of these housing units where the white workers used to live. And in solving the problem of abandoned housing, they created a new problem of unkept, vacant lots. But most important, racial residential segregation has two dimensions. On the one hand, it separates blacks and whites and other people of color. But it also creates areas where blacks are contained because of a combination of low incomes and high rents. Because of those levels of containment, their communities become sites of predatory forms of investment and development. And by that I mean to say, in Buffalo, the top problem facing the community is rent gouging and unhealthy homes. And rent gouging occurs when a person is charged 35% or more of their income to rent a house or an apartment that is essentially substandard and undesirable. And so we believe that hyper profits are being derived from these neighborhoods and communities. Let me give you a specific example. In the neighborhoods of the Broadway Fillmore neighborhood, right off of Martin Luther King Park, in that area, the median household income for renters is $13,000 a year. The median gross rent, which includes your rent plus utilities, is $820, above the citywide median gross rent. That gets translated into about $9,000 a year. You do the math. If a person stays in that house and spends $9,000 a year for 5 years, they spend over $40,000 on a dump. And many of the houses that they are living in, those rental houses, they don't cost any more than $10,000 or $15,000. So after 2 or 3 years, the landlords are making nothing but pure profits. Pure profits. Multiply that by thousands of housing units on Buffalo's east side, and you begin to get an idea of the pornography of profits that are being generated in these spaces because of the limited options and choices. The secret is to maintain the low quality of housing and neighborhood environments because it pushes down all of the costs, including property values, which allows the profits to become even higher. But it comes at a cost because of the conditions that I have spoken about. Most blacks in Buffalo do not live long and healthy lives. There's a 52% differential in the premature death rates between blacks and whites. And if you look at an area called years of potential life lost, there's almost 6,000 years difference in terms of the potential life loss. And potential life loss is a measure, it's a cumulative measure that whenever you die before age 75, those years are added to potential life loss. And so when we talk about premature death, we're not just talking about someone dying before their time. We're talking about a person who would have been a great scientist, perhaps saving thousands of lives, had they not died at birth. We're talking about that prodigal son that never had an opportunity for redemption. We're talking about leaders who were snatched from their communities before they reached their full human potential. So when we talk about premature death, we are talking about social disruptions that create havoc in the lives of black people and the communities in which they live. This is the legacy of racial residential segregation. It's not so much about the individual choices that people made. The people in Buffalo and elsewhere, they didn't have anything to do with Babcock's theory of value. That was between the real estate industry and the financial institutions. You can search your Bibles all day long and you won't find anything talking about the rich and the poor and the black and the white need to live in separate places and spaces. And if you do find it, I would question who wrote that Bible. Systems and structures that have normalized oppressive and exploitative conditions and have hidden themselves so that we think the solutions lie simply in feeling good about each other and singing Kumbaya. Now, don't get me wrong, we should feel good about each other. And we should sing Kumbaya. But then in the end, we should use that unity to go find the structures of racism and social class inequality and dismantle them and build a new system that will create a new framework to guide our individual choices, a new framework to shape race relations, a new framework that will allow us to realize in practice a good life for everybody and a place where all groups and races are able to live long and healthy lives anchored with good mental, social, and physical well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Our closing words today are by Bell Hooks. Beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. And now I'll extinguish the chalice. Please join me by reading the words printed in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our postlude video is Love Reaches Out, and this was created by artists from the sanctuaries in Washington, D.C.
Show you and way back home. But don't you worry, 'cause I've been with you all along.
Oh, I ain't worried, 'cause I can feel it, 'cause I can feel it. Yeah, they said it's hard to really see it, and the reason why we living. Don't chase it with your eyes, can recognize it till it's given. The world in front of me became the molding of my vision. The pain that came to me is what I blame in my decisions. How can I find the courage when my heart is feeling missing? How do I find a time when I know that the clock is ticking? I'm a soldier for this love, is guaranteed to be my mission. Wish I could find it easy like I see it in the children. Hey, looking back as I move forward, Sankofa, I want a love that explodes, call it a supernova. What it takes to reach the heavens, let me stand closer. Put the pieces all together, witness Jehovah. God is patient with his son, he plant the seed and let it grow. When I love it unconditional, I learn to let it go. Open your arms, what I'm talking about. Without a doubt, I can feel the love reaching out.
Love reaches out. My love reaches out. Love reaches out. Love reaches out.
My love reaches out. Can you feel it? Yeah. I'm never giving up, I'm keeping cool, I'm in control. My praise, I give it up, a higher power's in control. This light is guiding me, I'm armed with everything I know. This love is getting closer, I can feel it in my soul. Long as I am living, I still got the time to show the patience that was given from the ones that let me grow. Forgive me for debating back and forth, to and fro. This love is reaching out, I'm giving it to you and yours. Walk with me in solidarity. My sanctuary eases my disparity. When I look into your eyes, I'm looking carefully. What do you know? There is me. No more questioning the things that I can never see. Touch, taste, smell, hear, no more mystery. Just the faith that's stronger than my pain and misery. I found it in myself and it will forever be. The breath of love that gave me the breath of life. A breath of lost spirits, give it back and I energize. If I never take another, let my voice come and speak it out. And give you the feeling of love reaching out.
Love reaches out.
Yes, it does.
My love reaches
And I can feel it, I can feel it, I can feel it. Hey.
reaches out. My love reaches
Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Can you hear it now?
reaches out.
Oh yes, it does.
My love reaches
Can you
out.
feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Hey.
Reaches out. My love reaches
Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Can you hear it now?
Love can change you, let it grow. The seeds will reap the love you sow. Fill your heart till it explodes, and love can take over your soul. Love opens doors without a key. Evolves through patience and honesty. Trust love and just let it be. Feel the power of love between you and me. Between you and me. Between you and me. Feel the power of love between you and me. Love
Sing it
reaches
loud. Can
out. My love reaches soul.
If you would like to stay, Dr. Taylor has offered to answer questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, thank you all. See you in September.
Any questions?
I have a question about the health disparities that you cited. Is this a combination of access to health care? Is it also the quality of health care? And I have one example that I'm thinking of, which is I was getting a mammogram, and I learned during that process that breast tissue for African American women is more dense than breast tissue for white women, and that many of our healthcare centers don't have they make the right mammogram equipment, but they're not in the right places so that women who need them can have access to them. So could you just speak about, there's so much more about healthcare, could you just expand a little bit on it?
I'd be more than happy to. When we think of health, it's two elements that are driving the overall quality of health in terms of social well-being. What we call the social determinants of health. They account for about 80% of an individual's health outcomes. And the social determinants of health refer to the physical and environmental and behavioral conditions that exist within neighborhoods and communities. And then about 20% to the quality of the healthcare system itself. Now, I always tell people that this 20% is huge. Don't minimize this 20%. The 20% is absolutely huge and absolutely essential. But when we start to try to understand these health outcomes, we see two elements. One are the horrendous living conditions. These conditions, in particularly substandard housing, construct causal pathways to adverse health outcomes. And so we suspect, for example, that the extraordinarily high infant mortality rates among African American women in Buffalo, almost 3 times the rate among whites. And we're talking about rates at third world levels. I mean, these would be bad in Latin America. We think they stem from the housing conditions that people are living under. We think they stem from the toxicity of stress that generates from these conditions. And then when you combine that with the medical racism and all of those shortcomings, then you get a negative synergism betwixt and between the two. So it's a combination. And so when we look at Buffalo and Erie County, according to the Robert Wood Johnson's Foundation, we're one of the unhealthiest county in all of New York State. Buffalo and Erie County ranks 46 out of 62 counties in terms of the quality of its health as measured by length and quality of life. And I suspect that much of that distortion has very much to do with the conditions of both Blacks and the Latinx population. And also the rural white population in Erie County. I mean, that population is hidden because of their scattered nation, and they're scattered around in a lot of instances high income municipalities. But the conditions in a lot of these places are just horrid. I mean, we have cases where people are living in tents, living in trailers that don't have operative toilets and the like. So the health disparities between that low-income, rural white population in Erie County gets lost because most of the data will aggregate whites regardless of social class. So that's a great question. We look at it, about 80% is related to your neighborhood conditions and about 20%. So as a consequence, you have to attack, to improve health outcomes, you have to attack both the neighborhood conditions, and you have to go after medical forms of racism. And in Buffalo, we're working on both fronts. At the UB Medical School, I'm a part of a team that's putting together an anti-racist curriculum that will go through all 4 years of medical school, as we're looking to change the physicians that we create and alter their outcomes. I also run a virtual workshop during the spring on competencies in health equity that our guest here attended some of those workshops last year. And we have some other programs that are going on attempting to connect the things that are going on in health with the things that are going on inside of the neighborhood and the community. Hence, my research center is located now in the Community Health Equity Research Institute at Jacobs as a way of strengthening this relationship between health and the built environment. Yes.
A lot of times it seems to be redeveloping a lot of some of the older industrial sections of the city, and they're putting in apartments and things like that. I'm just wondering how this negatively affects Black neighborhoods and gentrification. If they just keep on raising rates to reflect the influx of people wanting to pay higher rates of rent. So I was just wondering if you.
No, I think that's a great question. And again, this is why I continue to go back to this questions of systems and structures, not individual choices, but our choices are being influenced by the systems and the structures that are in place, and the systems and the structures are shaping relationships, and they're shaping values and beliefs that in turn influence other kinds of action. First of all, let me say that the movement of higher income whites back into the city, I think is a good thing. The bad thing is that the real estate market and the way the real estate industry operates is that it places profits over people, and it always seeks to maximize profits regardless of the social impacts. And city leaders are complicit in the sense that they don't try to regulate and control. And I always like to say that the market is like a hungry dog. It just wants to eat. And if you, we can test this theory if you don't believe me. Come Thanksgiving, you get your dog and don't feed it for a couple of days, and then put that turkey on the table and leave for about an hour. When you come back, two things are going to be, you'll find out. When you say, Fido, Fido, he won't come or she won't come. Be hid. The second thing, the turkey will be destroyed, gone. Hungry dogs eat. The real estate industry is the same way. So when they see whites moving in, they see a market. And their goal is to maximize profits. So rents are going to go up. So if this person is renting an apartment at $4,000 a month, and this person has got an apartment right across the street at $1,000, they're going to say, hey, I'm hungry too. I want to eat like them. So they'll put those people out and raise rents, and it will go on and on and on until the people who originally lived there are forced out. They can't afford to live there anymore. So for all of this to work, we have to change the structure and the system so that to accommodate new folks who want an urban experience and create an environment where they can live side by side with others who were there ahead of time. So we have to reimagine the city. We have to reimagine how we generate resources. We have to reimagine the way we want to be able to create wealth. Otherwise, we'll end up like Washington, D.C. In 1970, 70% of the population in D.C. was black. Today, it's less than 40, around 42 or 43. In St. Louis, Missouri, the same way. Folks are being kicked out. Right now in Buffalo, for the first time in 5 decades, the African-American population in the city has dropped below 90,000 residents. So the dangers are real, and we have tools in place like community land trust and many other tools to be able to effectively combat that. But my view is that we have the wrong set of politicians in office, and we have to get rid of them. We have to get rid of them and bring in a new group of politicians, and we have to produce a new group of developers and others with greater imagination and people who are not willing to consistently place profits over people. You, and then in the back. Yes. Make a comment.
On Friday, we went to a funeral in Buffalo. One of my husband's workers' father had died. He was glad.
And you stand up and
Sure. So, this man who died was born in 1959, and they were showing pictures like you always see at a funeral. And he had on the same shirt as my brother. I recognize, the style at the time. And he was the same age as my brother. And, here he had died. They didn't even know why he had died. They took him to the hospital and everything. They didn't even know why he had died. And my brother, who has poor health, is doing fine. And it was just an amazing, for me, to experience that this man, had died so young. Like we were saying, he lived 75 or 76, he died at 62.
Now, the point you raise is really important, because it poses the question: is why is all of this going on in the world's wealthiest country? And I'm just a scholar, and I live in a simple world. In God we trust, and everybody else must have data. And so we live in a world of myths in the United States. I mean, I hear people tell me all of the time, the United States is the greatest nation on earth. I said, based on what variable? Based on what variable? You click off literally all of the variables. Life expectancy? No. This country is way down the list among the developed nations in terms of life expectancy. The quality of life, way down. And virtually every indicator except wealth. And the 1%ers have most of that, not the 99%ers. So there's a lot of suffering out here. And sometimes as we focus on individual suffering, for example, in the African American community, well, God knows there's so much death and disease that is unnecessary, that is just painful. But there are other groups that are suffering as well. And when you build a society based on profits, not people, you get all kinds of things. I mean, I have a friend, she's white, but her and her husband have lost their jobs so many times, that's now part of their lives. Now, they're high-end folks, so they lose one job, usually in 4 or 5 months, they back up running again, and in their mind, this is just the way business operates and works. But it ought not be the way business operates and works. Precarity drives American society today. Everybody living on the edge. Many people with 1 or 2 year contract jobs and all of the other types of things. And that produces the kind of stress that impacts in many different ways. Yes?
Yes, our community here in East Aurora is 98% white. So my question to you is, should we work to integrate this community to a greater extent? Would that help the problem we talked about today? And if so, how specifically would you recommend we start? Which systems, which structure?
I mean, I think that's a great question. My view is that we must dismantle the existing system of land valuation and the values that it upholds, because we will never be able to create an equitable society as long as we exist in a system of racial residential segregation. The anchoring of this system of segregation centers around the segregation of groups by class. So Americans will say we hate racial segregation, but we love class segregation. You can't have it both ways. You really, really, really can't. So to me, the way we attack that throughout Erie County, but in our own areas, is that one, we have to eliminate the structures. I don't know all of them here, but I suspect the zoning laws, the remnants of restrictive covenants that are buried up in here. And I think the other part of it is that we have to shatter the bans, written and unwritten, against low-income housing and low-income housing settlements in this area. I have no interest in the integration of elite blacks and whites and other people of color. None, because that's pointless. That's pulling together everybody that don't want freedom for anybody and saying you've done something. So those are the kinds of things I think we have to begin to do, to understand that the conditionality that you see on the east side is made possible by the affluence that you see in other locations and places. It's made by real estate and financial principles that isolate lower income groups from higher income groups and racialized groups from others. And we have to shadow that as part of the process of reimagining and remaking America. And the first step in that process is, as we shadow those things, reimagine how value can be constituted. Understand what I mean? One white man, came up with this idea. I mean, God didn't invent it. It didn't fall out of the sky magically and one day we woke up with it. It's not based on any kind of law of social nothing. It was a guy's idea. Hey, what if? And he got everybody to go along with it. There's no principle that says if you live in a big house and I live next door to you in a small house, that your big house now is not as valuable as it was before I got there. How can that be? That's like saying you are a beautiful woman, but the minute I got close to you, you got ugly. How could that be? Or the guy back there is an ugly guy. And the minute the woman got next to him, he got to be good looking. How could that be? No. It's nothing but something that somebody made up and got everybody to believe. So we have to fight against that by battling to change the structures and by understanding that we want to live in a world where race and class and income ought not to have anything to do with where you live and who are your neighbors. We've got to redesign a system of housing value based on exclusivity. I mean, what we say we are is not the way we live our lives. All over, you hear, we want inclusivity. We want diversity. I mean, it's all over everywhere. Even in Fox News. Even Donald Trump is talking about it. Carl Palladino. He's running around out here these days. But the systems that we have designed, right, drive exclusivity. Yes?
So how do you untie the systems, like the systems tie us into a knot, into a space that we don't want to be in? How do you untie them?
I think that's a great question. I think you identify the structures. We always say there are things that are happening downstream and then there are things that are happening upstream. So when we talk about health outcomes and fixing things at a neighborhood level, for example, that's downstream. But there's some upstream things that we got to deal with. So this is what I was meant before. Downstream, we want to try to get some people in and create some diversity and all that kind of stuff. But upstream, There are structures that prevent that. So upstream is, and it's a battle. Upstream, they'll probably hear things like innocent zoning laws that say you can't have this, you can't have. We have to unpack that kind of stuff and then fight for more inclusive zoning systems. There are probably a lot of oppositional components to developing housing that lower income groups could live in, or developing transportation routes that would make these things available. So we've got to operate on two fronts. One is figure out the kind of things that will help, and then start looking upstream and start to get creative. We're going to try, I'm working with the city's, the county's poverty commission. I'm one of their commissioners. And this year we're going after close to $500,000, whether we get it or not, I don't know, to do a marketing campaign around the housing situation, because we don't think a lot of people know and understand what's going on. And we want to raise levels of consciousness about it. So the consciousness raising, the awareness, the making of people mindful of these things is a part of the process of creating a climate for change. And so, like right now, we've zeroed laser-like on this issue of substandard housing. And we're just trying to figure out, well, how do we, one, begin to raise consciousness about it? How do we raise cases? How do we do other types of things? We already start looking at how do we reimagine the creation of value, right? And we've looked at things, well, what happens if we take value away from structures and put value on land? And how do we establish in that? How do we create systems of value that are based on heterogeneity, not homogeneity? And come up with the formulas to do that. Because right now, value is attached to homogeneity, not heterogeneity. And then begin to battle and fight for those types of things. So we always, and a thing that we have to fight against, there's a tendency, I call it the new American way. Whenever the problem goes big, policymakers go small. The bigger the problem, the smaller the solution is going to be. And then they theorize by saying, in order we do this because we want to win some victories. And then on these victories, we will build momentum. And it's like you used to go to a restaurant and they have appetizers and they have the entree. And then one day you go in there and there's nothing but appetizers. And the point is that we have to flip the switch. When the problems go big, we have to come big. We have to go big. And so we look at the structures and then we come up, okay, how can we take it down? So I've got a team and we're putting together research studies to try to show direct causality between these houses and very specific health outcomes. Because the minute we're able to establish that, the next step is to sue the city with class action suits, claiming that they are responsible for this, just as they did in Flint, et cetera. Yes?
Have you uncovered cities or towns that have done this well? I mean, Buffalo's 6th worst in segregation. What cities have done it well, and how do they change their structure?
Well, the first thing that we have to look at when we talk about segregation, when we say Buffalo is the 6th segregated, we're talking about Erie County. because they measure the segregation indexes based on the county. So so for example, about 72% of white Erie County residents live outside the central city. Only 18% of whites in Erie County reside in Buffalo City, while something like 78% of blacks and around 60% of Latinx in Erie County reside in the core. To answer your question, no, nobody has done well on this, because the structures of racial residential segregation are across the country. And the second part of it is that communities have ignored the class dimension of segregation. And so in a number of the places that brag about we've created stable, integrated neighborhoods, I mean, they're talking about these neighborhoods of elite blacks and whites and some other elite groups, and that's nothing. I don't count that. Somebody comes to me with that in my class, I said, that's unacceptable, because we're looking at other forms. And communities like that, they don't even consider low-income groups. They don't even consider that integrated or segregated. So the models that we use to try to measure and make sense out of that are not great. And in communities, I mean, because I'm always intrigued by Buffalo's West Side, and I'm intrigued by Buffalo's West Side because you have a very different group of white folks down there. I mean, you have a lot of young, low-income, almost countercultural whites, but they're really cool people. You know, they believe in authentic diversity, and so they're all down there with Asians and immigrants. There's a whole bunch of black people over there too. But they're in an environment that everything is threatened by the gentrification forces, and they're struggling. Many of them paying more and more of their income on rents in order to be able to stay there. So there are these powerful economic forces that continue to break these things up. So it's not just about integration. It's about how do we redesign residential areas and communities that can accommodate folks from across the class and race perspective. And I don't know of any place I would consider a model along those lines here. I know of other places where similar types of things have been done, but I know of no place that it has been done here, because I know of no place here where people have had an honest discussion about this interplay between race, class, and this question of value. And by that I mean to say a lot of people will try to pretend that housing values won't be impacted, but they will be, because this is the way the system is designed and structured. So we have to talk about, well, how do we rethink value so that value, means something else, and that we have to understand that value is it's a kind of social thing. It's not real. I mean, it really isn't. I mean, I bought a house 20 years ago. over on the west side of Buffalo for $100,000. it's the same house, and somebody, Zella told me it's worth about 700,000 now. But it's, you know, I walk around and I look at the wood chain. You know, did the house grow a baby? You know, it's silliness. You know, and I know y'all got stocks, and to me that's the silliest thing. You can see one day the stock is this, you come back a week later and it went up a whole lot. You take that picture because you're scared to come back to see it go down again. But how could all of this is just, it's a lot of subjective stuff that's going on in relationship to that. And we should not shy away from the challenge of reimagining and you know, redoing some other types of things. And we should try to make Buffalo the first place that steps out in front in these things. And you know, that's my view. I love our region. I chose to stay. I mean, I didn't have to. I could go anywhere, could have gone anywhere I wanted to, and often turned down jobs and opportunities. In large measure, because at some point, you want to say, this is my home, and I want to grow, build, and develop my home. So my thoughts are we've got the kind of population, we've got the kind of forward-thinking, visionary individuals and people here. And it's time for us to begin to sit down to see how we can work more closely together. I'm talking to some people right now about holding some kind of summit next year where all of the progressive forces and leaderships of progressive groups, we sit around a round table and begin to figure out how we can begin to build a joint set of common interests in how we can take control of our region, our city. I mean, we have a right to Erie County. We have a right to it. We have a right to shape the county in our own image. We have a right to create a beloved community where the wonderful things that you all have talked about this morning are extended across Erie County. And although the name would be different, the values of this facility and institution would be the values of everybody. I mean, we have a right to do that. We have a right to have that dream. And so let's figure out how to claim our right to the city and the region. Thank you.